Hello and welcome to the Young Railway Professionals' first ever Heritage Railway webinar. We're talking about quite a current topic today of the impact of COVID-19 on heritage railways. So as I'm sure you have all appreciated by now, this is sort of an unprecedented time for everything across all walks of life, and the heritage railways are no different. Each railway is in a different situation and have their sort of own unique features about the way they run, the way they operate, and that's also true in how COVID-19 has affected them. So we've got a great panel today from different areas of the heritage railway sector, and we'll be talking to them shortly. So the Young Railway Professionals traditionally tries to help heritage railways by volunteering in a more hands-on sense. So we visited the Ffestiniog Railway a couple of times over the past few years, and we've helped out with sort of doing track renewals and helping with the upgrades of their sheds, and you can see some photos here of that. But obviously at the moment we can't go and help them in that way, so we're looking to do things a bit differently, and this webinar is one of those things. And we're also hoping in the future to do more of these events all over the country and increase the number that we do. So please keep an eye on the website, and we'll publish them as soon as we have them. The Young Railway Professionals as an organisation is about promoting the railway as a great place to work to young people, inspiring and developing young people in the industry as well, to sort of keep young people in the industry, as it's a great place to work and also help further everyone's careers. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do, have a look on our website, there's plenty on there. So we're now going to go over to our first speaker, of Paul Lewin of the Ffestiniog Welsh Highland Railways. He's the general manager there. So we'll go over to you now, Paul.
Yes, good afternoon, and it's an unusual situation sitting in my office here in North Wales, wondering how many people are tuning into this. So good afternoon to you all. First of all, perhaps just worth just mentioning who we are. Ffestiniog Welsh Highland Railways is the longest heritage railway in the country and one of the three largest in terms of business turnover. We've got 40 miles of railway line, over 20 steam engines, over 60 mainstream carriages, some historic carriages as well. We've got 100 people that work for us full time. There's that goes up to probably 160 in the summer. Then we've got something just short of 1,000 volunteers and 6,000 members. So we're quite a big organisation. We have something like 250,000 people a year that come along and ride on our trains. So one of the more sizable railways. Now, I'm planning to talk to you just briefly about COVID-19. That's the subject today, and what's happened to us. And I'm afraid much of it is not about trains and railways per se, it's about business. And where I think it's best to position this is to talk in three sections. One is the route to lockdown and what happened there, what happens in the middle when we're at a steady state, and then how do we hope to climb out of all this. So the lockdown came quite rapidly, and there were some surprises along the way here, and it's largely been for us a big PR exercise, because we're located in a sparsely populated area in North Wales, and the local people have been particularly concerned about COVID and the effects of large numbers of visitors on the area and the ability of the hospitals to cope with an influx of people. Now, the first news came that there was to be a close down of bars and restaurants, or rather the suggestion that you shouldn't be visiting bars and restaurants came on on a Friday, and on the Saturday there was an enormous turnout of people turning up to walk up Snowdon on a glorious sunny Saturday afternoon. So it was really like a midsummer bank holiday. It was unbelievable, and this shaped our response to COVID, because the local population was so concerned about the volume of people turning up that the sensitivities just really went through the roof. And you've probably seen it on national TV and other news channels. So here we are in an unusual situation. On the following Monday, Boris announces a lockdown, and we've been talking about running trains and how we cancel trains, what we do, how we deal with that. And you know, Boris had said something, and before it could even percolate through, we were receiving criticisms on social media for not responding quickly enough to the messages that the government was sending out. And actually, what was happening, we were busy communicating, consulting with our staff and making a plan and letting them know what would happen. But at first, we stopped running the trains and thought we could run catering businesses. We realised that quickly that wouldn't be possible, so we closed our catering businesses. Then we thought we'd concentrate on engineering. Then it became abundantly apparent that our staff didn't want to be at work at this time, and that we closed down our engineering facilities largely as well. So I think it was characterised by it being very changing circumstances. From one day to the next, you didn't know how things were going to change, and you had to change your plan on almost a 3 to 4 hourly basis, which we did. So that was quite painful. But once we'd arrived at a locked down state with the railway closed, no trains moving, no people at work, we were able to take stock of where we were and make a plan. Now, vital to this plan has been the government's idea of furlough. So that means they're paying the wages of our staff to stay at home. And we've topped up that amount in some cases, but in essence, the government are paying for our staff. So we're now in a very strange circumstance where of our 97 full-time paid staff, 92 of them are not here. So we're running this railway by just 5 people, which is a very unusual circumstance indeed. It's pleasing to say that it's very stable in terms of trespass, vandalism and other problems, and the weather has been kind to us, and thank goodness it has. Where I'm sitting in my office now, just behind the screen, is a 65-inch colour TV with all the CCTV feeds from all around the railway being fed into here, so I can see Carnarvon Station, Ffestiniog Station, and everywhere in between scrolling around, so we can keep an eye. We also have a team of volunteers at each location who are doing the security job for us and reporting back in. So a very different scene. But where it then gets us to is with all these people not working now, and our income has gone from £6 million a year to nothing. That's £6 million a year to nothing. It's worth thinking about how you deal with that. There is no income just at this time. So we've had to work out a plan, and survival is all about our finances. And it is the same for any railway. In essence, you have to marshal together all of the money that you possibly can and understand how much is there that you can draw upon. And then you then need to look at the burn rate, and that is how much do you need to spend each month to keep the business ticking over in its current state. And I don't mind sharing with this audience where we stand, and that is that our burn rate is about £40,000 to £45,000 a month. And some people have said, wow, surely with all the railway closed down and nothing happening, there's no costs. Far from it. A modern business in the heritage railway sector like ours has got, for example, 10 leased vehicles, which we still have to pay the leases on. We can't just send those back. We've also got telephone contracts. We've got 12 places where we've got water supplies where we have a standing order. The list goes on, but you get the picture that there's a lot of things that have to be paid for. Last week, some cows went through a fence, got onto the line. This was a problem. We've had to send out a fencing contractor. I've now got a bill for £3,500 on my desk that I can't avoid. So there is this money that we have to spend, and we've got to look at our pot of money and say, well, how long can we survive before we get income coming in? So when people are trying to assess heritage railways and say how long can they go on, it doesn't matter whether they're big or small. What matters is how much money they have, what their burn rate is, and how long they will last. So you could have a very large railway, very strong railway that has a small pot of money and a high burn rate, and they're in trouble. Whereas a smaller railway might have the opposite set of circumstances. So there we go. There's a picture of where we are now. And then naturally comes the question about how do we get out of this? And the problem that we face is that when the government are talking about which sectors can open up, we are firmly in the leisure sector, which will probably be the last to open up. And also we're in a place where people are crowded closely together. So think of us like a pub, and it's the same thing, isn't it? A large number of people crowded onto a train, drinking, eating, enjoying the scenery and so on. So in order to find a way for our business to work, we've got to find a way for that to happen safely and still have enough volume of passengers coming through. We've listened to the mainline railways where we've been hearing about them talking about capacity, speaking of anything between 10% and 10 and 25% of normal capacity. Well, I can assure you that there's practically no heritage railway that can operate and survive on a capacity of 25% of normal on their trains. That just isn't going to make enough money to make it worth operating trains. And those railways are probably better to just stay closed because they will lose less money by doing that than they would by opening and running at a loss. So this is what the situation we face. In a nutshell, what it boils down to is whilst the government is paying furlough, paying the staff wages, there's a chance of survival. If furlough ends and we are not able to operate at something more than 80% of our usual capacity, then we are in deep trouble as a business, as would any heritage railway be. So we have to think very carefully about how we move from here. My prediction is that heritage railways will take longer than you think to get back into an operational state, because they will understand that they've got to get sufficient income to make it worth operating those trains. I think that's about my time up. Hopefully that gives an overview of where we've been, the steady state, and then how the issues that we face getting out of the crisis. And I'll be more than happy to answer the questions to the panel later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That's much appreciated. Very insightful. So as Paul just said, we will be taking questions at the end, the entire panel. You can ask those by using the box on the right hand side of your screen and going down to the section which says questions. So we will now be going over to Michael Whitehouse at Vintage Trains, who will talk us through his point of view.
Hello everybody, good evening. great to be able to come and have a chat with you. We're slightly different to the Ffestiniog, which I suppose is helpful in this conversation because we shall be approaching some different things. But we run express steam trains on the national network, and we have a workshop which engineers a future for everyone. We have a training scheme. Those are basically our two businesses. And the next couple of slides just show you exactly what we do for those of you who don't know, and then we'll attack how we deal with the COVID position. At Christmas time, we run Polar Express trains, which are very high density. We're talking running 72 trains, 5 or 4 a day out of the main city terminus with 300 people on each one. So very high density with performances and catering. Big tricky for COVID. And the other things we do, maybe on the other slides, if we can see them quickly, our workshop is a completely different operation. It's a commercial engineering concern turning over well over £1 million a year with 25 paid staff. So we've got two main businesses which we will address, I think, in this presentation. The other trains we run some family trains on the Shakespeare Express in the summer Sundays, and we also run some long distance excursions to international places of interest like York, Stratford and Oxford. All over Network Rail. So that's basically what we do. And so how did this affect us? Well, at the time of the announcement, we weren't running any trains because it happened to come in March and our season starts in April. However, our trains are run on a charter basis, so they're planned in advance, and such trains as we had advertised were largely fully booked. So we had lots of money, and we indeed still have lots of money in our bank account from passengers who pre-book. And our trains usually loaded about 80%, so we had something in the region of £150,000 in cash from those passengers, and they're obviously concerned about what to do. Our staff in the workshop, of course, were concerned for their safety and well-being, which was our primary concern. So what did we do? We moved pretty quickly, and we took advantage of the government's furlough scheme, and we furloughed everybody except for 4 people, the general manager, the finance manager, and 2 individuals who stayed in the workshop, making sure it was safe, because we're in the middle of a city, we're in the middle of a network rail depot, so it's very secure, but nevertheless we wanted to make sure that our workshop equipment was completely free from pilfering and damage. And those 2 individuals have actually lived on site and been doing some engineering at a slight profit, which enabled us to tick over. Having sort of stabilized and stopped everything, then what did we do? We told our passengers that really we weren't in control of this. The government were making all the decisions, and at the beginning it wasn't very clear exactly what the process was. So we just cancelled the first trains for the first couple of months, and then decided we would sit and wait and find out what was going on. That gave us time to look at the finances. So very quickly, we put together an emergency plan. We have pretty sharp finances and a good team. And we put together an emergency plan on some assumptions. And we took pessimistic ones, really, because it was pretty clear to us early on in discussions that social distancing was going to survive for a very long time, indeed until there was a cure or people decided there wasn't going to be a cure and had to live with it. So we pretty quickly based our financial assumptions on 2 criteria. We ignored all the tittle-tattle about Heritage Railways coming back to work pretty quickly, and we assumed that our workshop would not come back to work fully until the 1st of October. We still don't know whether that's right, but that's an assumption that we took. And we also assumed that we wouldn't run a single charter train until Easter 2021. I think that would have set the hairs running in the railway press had been announced at the time, but those were our assumptions. And we were able to make those assumptions because we've always been prudently financed, and we've always managed to keep a war chest in the charity. And that war chest will be depleted if those assumptions turn up trumps. We will hope we will improve on those assumptions because TLW has been doing some work, and we assumed that it would have no income at all. And I think with a bit of luck and a bit of careful planning, we should be able to send our workshop partially back to work. So our position is rather different to the Ffestiniog and a private railway in that we don't own any infrastructure. So we don't have to worry about that. We just gallivant around on Network Rail, so we can leave them to worry about the infrastructure. We don't need to do any checks of that kind. And indeed, it's in fact only about an hour or two before this webinar started, the ORR have now issued their guidelines for going back to work, which are pages and pages long. But again, we can ignore the infrastructure part of that because Network Rail infrastructure is up and running and there's no difficulty with that. So assuming that we did want to run any trains, we just made sure that our staff were competent. Our current competencies for running trains on the main line are all current, or our medicals, our route assessments, route familiarisation are all absolutely current, and the ORR has given a dispensation on a 3-month basis anyway. So we would technically be able to start running trains again tomorrow from a technical point of view. But from a realistic point of view, it's totally off the table. There's absolutely no prospect of us running any trains at all until this virus is brought under control for 2 reasons, really. One is social distancing. There's no prospect of being able to do social distancing on an economic feasibility on any train that we might seek to run. And I can be pretty black and white about that because, you know, on charter trains, the profit is always in the last coach, and you know, our model runs on 60 to 80% capacity, which is totally impossible in a social distancing environment. So running any trains while social distancing is required would be financial suicide. So essentially, Vintage Trains Limited, our operator, will go into hibernation until we see what the light at the end of that tunnel is. And we're predicting that won't be until April, but we might be right and we might be wrong. Interestingly, financially, it actually pays us not to run trains in some ways, because the main expense, apart from individuals who are furloughed, is the public liability insurance. As you probably know, we're required to carry £155 million worth of public liability cover to run express steam trains on the main line, just like any other train operating company. And very fortuitously, our premium falls due in August. So if the position isn't resolved, we simply won't incur that cost. We can always pick it up and start again whenever it does become possible. So from the Vintage Trains point of view, it's fairly straightforward. We're just going to be in hibernation. And whilst the government furlough the staff carries on, which we think it probably will for the leisure industry for a while, we shall just twiddle our thumbs and do nothing. The workshop, however, is a different kettle of fish. It's an income earner. We want to get back to work. We've been talking to all our customers. Only one has said, please don't do any work. All the others have shown us their bank accounts, so we know perfectly well there's a lot of profitable work that can be done there if we can work out a safe system of work for doing it. And the issues there in a workshop, clearly, again, there's all the social distancing and guidelines from the government to read through and work out. And in a workshop, there's some things that can be done by individuals. For example, a machinist can do his own work on his own, so there's no real issue there. But as you see in this picture, where people have to work together, that's a real problem. And so we'll have to give that some very serious thought as to which people can do what work. And clearly we'll be looking at the individual contracts and work and seeing how we can bring people back to work over a period of time. And do I have all the answers for that now? No, because the guidance only came out this afternoon and we'll have to look at it. The other issue, which I think is relatively important, actually very important really for both our types of work, is the fear factor. People are really afraid of something they can't see. And in our conversations with everybody, our friends, our employees, our shareholders, and our staff, we found that virtually every family has somebody who is vulnerable within it. And those people, of course, are at the highest risk and must stay at home. So where we've got a worker or a passenger or a volunteer who has a vulnerable person in the family, should they come back to work themselves? Those are interesting moral issues which we have yet to discuss and face and work out. And in fact, I was talking this afternoon with one of our key employees in the workshop whose wife had a kidney transplant a few years ago. He's keen to come back, but we must keep him and his wife alive. So how can we manage to do that? By working in isolation, perhaps at the depot. So all these things are very important because, you know, we all like the steam engines, but frankly, life's about people. And if the steam engines just sit there for a while, that's irrelevant. We must make sure that our people are in good shape, and that's paramount in our thoughts. So this is all evolving, and I think we're in touch with our communities and talking to them now, but I would predict that Tyseley Locomotive Works will gradually start to come back to work, which will improve our financial position and, if necessary, enable us to park up our trains for longer. We're giving some thought to whether it's possible to run an open day, but you've only just got to read the ORR guidelines. I had a quick flick through, and only a very quick flick through before going online, you know, and all the social distancing and the cleaning things are really difficult to do. So that's in summary. We're in reasonable financial shape. We will ride this through. We're going to spend the time improving our strategy and getting smarter about how we do things in the future. But I really don't think you should expect to see any heritage railways coming back with passenger services anytime soon. So that's the summary from Vintage Trains. It's slightly different to the Ffestiniog. I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for that. Very interesting to see the contrast there between a mainline operator such as Vintage Trains and the Ffestiniog. That's one of the things we were picking up on earlier, is every railway is different. It's very interesting to hear that. Just a reminder, you can continue to ask questions by using the box on the right-hand side. Keep sending them through and we'll answer some of them at the end with the panel. So we're now going to go over to Jonnie Pay, the commercial manager of the Spa Valley Railway.
Hello. So the Spa Valley is a railway that maybe not that well heard of. It's only 5 miles long. It carries about 40,000 people per year, and it has a turnover of around £700,000. Now, we're different from the Ffestiniog and Vintage Trains in that we don't actually have anyone paid. I'm a volunteer. Everyone else is a volunteer. We do rely a lot on contractors to undertake work on various things such as catering and boiler contracts. So we've not had to worry as much about having to pay our employees or make use of the government's furloughing scheme. And it came about to us at probably the worst time, as it has done more or less every heritage railway, in that we just come out of a period of closure. We'd spent, in effect, all the money that we'd made through the Santa Special season on keeping the railway ticking over through the January and February months, and we were just getting our 2020 season underway. And in fact, we'd brought in a visiting diesel locomotive, a Class 20, the week before the coronavirus lockdown came into place. So we had that outgoing for, well, no real benefit in that respect. However, the owners have very kindly allowed the loco to stay on site, so we can make use of it as and when that's possible, but that's getting further and further away, in my opinion, at the moment. So when it came in, well, we took the decision the week before, actually on the 17th of March, that we weren't going to be able to run this gala because of the social distancing measures that were being put in place already by then. And we knew that even if we tried to run it, it would be very foolish, and whether or not we'd make any money would potentially have left us in a bit of a financial jeopardy. So we took the decision to close, and the first thing we did was went around switching everything off. And a little railway like us, any income is needed, and we've got lesser expenses, but they're probably in line with what other railways do in the respect of our electricity bill is going to be in proportion to what we do with our sites. And switching everything off has actually reduced our electricity at one location by over £1,000 in a month. So we've had that massive saving, which has been greatly beneficial. In terms of the other financial stability around that time, we did have money in a savings account. We always try to have some money reserved. We can't spend any advance bookings money until the event's actually taken place. So that money was sat there, although trying to explain that to some people where they see a big sum of money sat in an account, unable to touch it, is a little bit difficult at times. And to put into perspective what we had to do in March, the amount of refunds that we gave was £12,000, or just over £12,000 in the March month alone, which for us is a huge sum of money for a small little business. That has gone down in April because fortunately a lot of customers have been prepared to move their bookings to a future date in the form of a voucher. So we're down to only £1,300 being refunded for April, and so far in May it's at £808, having just checked earlier on. But to compare it to this time last year, if you include all the refunds and the events that would have taken place, because our calendar doesn't really vary much from year to year, we've so far this year lost around £84,000 and 5,000 people's worth of ticket sales, which for a railway that is 100% volunteer run, it's quite a big loss to us, because we're relying on volunteers and their motivation to keep the railway going. And when all of this took place, we were at a very good period in our existence with highly motivated volunteers wanting to get on with lots and lots of projects. And the loss of, in effect, 84 grand's worth of income will take a long time to recover from. The other thing that's a bit unique about the Spa Valley, you can see the picture on the screen, is we run next to the main line. So we have a mile of track that we need to maintain. And fortunately, we were able to put the contractor that undertakes that work on hold for a period of time. But when we want to reopen there, we've got to undertake quite a few inspections before we can. So the cost of going beyond the gate, as we describe it, to Erridge will be in excess of £5,000, which when you've got no income and you've had no income for several months, and the cost of keeping the place sat there ticking over is about the same, £5,000 a month, is money we've got to find from somewhere. Now, as mentioned in the vintage trains bit, the public liability insurance, our annual bill is around £20,000 per year. And we're very fortunate that we've been given a grant from the local council, which will cover that. So that money has already come in to the company, and it will go into, or it's in a savings account, and that will go out to pay the annual insurance premium when that falls due in August. And as of today, we've actually also just been given another grant from another council, because we run through 2 counties, so we get Tunbridge Wells Borough Council and Wealdon District Council. We've been receiving another grant which will help support the railway in July and possibly into August. But other than that, we're reliant on people generously donating to keep our sort of outgoing costs paid for, so electricity being one of them, website use, Wi-Fi and internet at our location so that we can remotely log into all of our CCTV cameras, and also the phone lines, because it was established quite early on that cutting off our phone lines would actually cost more in the long term to reinstate them than it was going to be saving in the period of closure. How we're going to come out of this is quite a bit of an unknown. We've got a diesel multiple unit like a lot of other heritage railways, and you can introduce a form of social distancing on it, but we could well end up in a situation where we're just running trains and not really making any money, so it kind of becomes a bit irrelevant in that respect. What we'll probably see beforehand is people, volunteers, wanting to come back and work on their projects at our locations. That obviously has an impact on costs, and we've worked out that that will probably increase our monthly outgoings to around £10,000. Again, that will be met by donations, hopefully, or the hard truth of the matter is that all of the electricity and things like that will be switched off. We've been given a payment holiday on our water supply, although because we're not using steam engines at the minute, our water bill would be next to nothing anyway other than standing charges. So that's a little bit about the Spa Valley. I've not really got much more to add, but be more than happy to take questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Jonnie. Thank you for that insight. It's interesting to hear from the sort of smaller end of the heritage railway spectrum, but it's worth bearing in mind that there are a lot of railways quite similar to the Spa Valley in that they're 100% volunteer run. So it's great to hear that side of it as well. So we're now going to go over to questions for the whole panel. So can I invite the whole panel back to have their microphones and cameras on? There we go, just pull to go. If we start off with the first question, I think you might have covered this one, Michael, but we'll ask it anyway. So you mentioned high loadings on the Polar Express services that Vintage Trains run. Has there been any thoughts on can you run with social distancing measures in place?
Yes, we had a webinar with Warner Brothers in America, who are the franchisees, discussing this issue. And there's a variety of opinions, really. Some people say, oh, well, we'll just run some more trains and have less people on them. Bear in mind, we run on the main line, so it has to be to a timetabled operation. Our trains last year were 90% full, or 72 of them, and we had 25,000 people. So we can't actually do social distancing on the Polar Express. It's very black and white, and the Polar Express will not run on the main line in 2020. There may be some other options about doing some kind of film show, but I just, at the moment, as we stand now, we're not planning to run it.
Thank you for that. Now we've got a question for Paul at the Ffestiniog. Would it be financially feasible to restart engineering operations at Boston Lodge or reopening the catering outlets along the railway before services resume? And that's from Noel Hartley.
Yeah, hi Noel, and thanks for asking the question. And Noel is a colleague from the Keighley-Worth Valley Railway. Yeah, this is a real challenge. The way we look at it at the moment is that it is viable to do engineering work. We have a mixture of projects that we're working on. Some of them are funded from our own funds in-house, and some of them are from external customers. As it stands at the moment, it would make sense for us probably to try and do the work where we're taking funds in from external customers. That would help our cash situation. Burning our own cash on internal projects reduces the length of time for which we can survive. So we must be very careful about that. It may be that there's one or two projects where there are funds that are ring-fenced that we may work on. So the answer is a guarded yes, it would help with engineering, and we can do it in a socially distanced way because of the space that we've got in our workshops. And while the trains aren't running, we don't have the density of people booking on and so on. When it comes to catering, I pretty much despair of it actually, because it's pubs, it's places where people crowd in to create the atmosphere. And if we try and thin them out, that atmosphere won't be there. And also we just can't get the volume through to make it worthwhile. So it's unlikely. I've got a feeling that the startup costs of running the catering businesses are such that we'd need to see a really well-established flow of tourists before we made that move to open up.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we've got a question for the whole panel from Thomas Sweeney. He asks, has there been any coordination between independent railways to help mitigate the impacts of the shutdown? Is there likely to be any sharing of skills and resources during a phased reopening? So if we start off with Jonnie on this one.
I would hope so. There is a group of the 6 Southern Standard Gauge Heritage Railways that do communicate, but a big difference at the minute is that out of all of those, the majority of them have paid staff, so they're currently furloughed, and people like myself being a volunteer of some of the few that are doing work, and ultimately they'll have their own priorities when they do reopen. But I'd like to think we will be able to share ideas amongst one another, especially when it comes to crewing of things like locomotives, which obviously, like a steam engine with a driver and a fireman, there's physically no real way of maintaining a 2-metre social distance on the footplate.
Anything you'd like to add, Michael or Paul?
Well, I think everyone's been looking after themselves, frankly, up until now, because we have to move pretty quickly. There's been communications with different railways, sharing best practice and seeing whether we're doing the right thing, but we've largely been looking after ourselves. Going forward, we'll have to continue to do that. I suspect, not wishing to be too draconian about this, if there's some heritage railway failures, and I suspect there will be, because in business generally there will be failures. There may need to be some coordination, see if some rescues can be mounted to save some organisations. But we'll just have to see. I think not much has really started off in that area yet, and the HRA are still scrabbling around trying to work out what the guidance is. And I think it's every man for himself at the moment.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I chair a group of 10 general managers that meet regularly from a number of their heritage railways. So places like the Severn Valley, West Somerset, North Yorkshire Moors, North Norfolk, Great Central, and some of the other Welsh railways like Snowdon and Tyseley. And so the general managers meet as a team. We're now doing that online. It's quite disappointing, really, because it was always nice going to different railways and checking out the restaurants and pubs and trains and stuff. We can't do that anymore. But seriously, though, this group has worked together. It's a very strong group. I've had tremendous support from other general managers. We're sharing information. We're giving ourselves each other's shoulders to cry on. And we've got a situation where if we do have questions, we can speak to each other. So I think that has worked particularly well. And if I do nothing else as a result of this webinar, I'm going to invite Michael to join us, because I think working together there is, the strength in that, even if it's just to know you've got someone else to talk to, is in what is effectively a fairly lonely situation as a leader of a heritage railway at times.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. We've now got a question from Simon Hill, who asks, how are you managing staff competency and training whilst closed? So if we go to Jonnie first again.
Fortunately for us, we had a visit last year from the ORR and had an audit more or less done on our competence management system. So at the minute, all competence records for all of our staff are currently up to date and in date, such as medicals, and there aren't actually at the moment any due to happen until the latter part of this year. Although I was discussing with one of our inspectors the other day about the process of returning to the footplate for some of our drivers, but we also fall in quite a fortunate situation where a lot of our drivers drive on the main line, and they're still currently driving on the main line. So then bringing them back and onto a heritage railway is of a lesser risk, I would suggest, than what they're doing at the minute already in their paid employment. So from our perspective, things like driving of trains, which is what we're going to be going back to with a diesel unit in the first instance, probably won't be too much of a problem for us. But future medicals will have to be based on what our railway doctor says in terms of how that can take place.
And Michael?
Yes, I should have to draw a distinction, because actually we're not a heritage railway at all. When running steam engines on the main line, it's not classed as heritage, it's just simply a mainline operator. So therefore the rules and regulations apply to the Network Rail system. And fortunately, all our operating staff are in date. The ORR has allowed a 3-month leeway, and they're about to issue further guidance about that. But clearly, our staff would have to be competent on the rules, they have to be competent that they can sign the route, and they have to be competent in their own particular job as driver, inspector, fireman or guard or whatever it is. And those competencies will run out over time. And if it turns out that we're not going to run the trains until, say, next Easter, which is just our educated guess, then we will have to undertake some competency reassessments in that period. We can do that in collaboration with other TOCs where necessary, and we have our own assessment in-house, so we can manage all that through a program which we'll have to put in place when we know how long it takes.
And Paul?
We have our internal competency arrangements in place, and I think where we'll probably end up is, if we don't run until next season, we may just have to extend some competencies slightly. So if we were due a review in the first 2 months of next year, there might be a bit of a backlog. So I'm expecting that we might just have to ease a couple of things, but generally I don't think it would be a problem, because I think we've got in-house inspectors who can do the first time out run with the drivers, firemen, signalmen, etc. And and can get that covered. So it's one of my smaller worries, I would say.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. I've now got a question from Thomas Sweeney, who asks, is the government doing enough to protect the leisure sector? And can you think of anything that could be improved? We'll go to Jonnie first again.
From my own perspective, running a very small railway, having had the grant from 2 councils, that is enough for us. But we don't have the same volume of outgoings as, say, the Ffestiniog does, and the council arrangements are different. The ones we've got, the 2 grants, were from the government but via the council. So in our perspective at the minute, we're okay. But if this continues, I can see us getting into a situation where we have people going back to work because that's what they're being told to do, but Heritage Railways not being able to operate means no income. And even if we are able to operate, the income might not necessarily cover your running costs, and we could end up in a bit of a more difficult situation towards the latter part of the year. That's my own opinion.
And Michael?
Yes, I mean, as Paul's already mentioned, the furloughing systems have been very good, very helpful, saved everybody's bacon. And if that's eased out, that will obviously bring the pains on and may mean we have to look at our staff structuring differently. Because our rateable value is fairly high, we haven't really been able to get much by way of grant assistance. There's been a bit of lobbying generally with leisure industries in Birmingham to get that rateable value increased. But, you know, the government can only print so much money, so we're not holding out much hope for that. Frankly, I don't think there is much other help that the government's going to be able to give. Leisure industries, sadly, at the end of the queue. They're things that people don't actually have to have. They're going to deal quite rightly with things that people have to have, hospitals and general things that people do in their day-to-day environments rather than leisure stuff. So I'm not sure they're going to give a lot of help. The National Lottery Fund has got some money available, but it's infinitesimally small. So I think, again, it's going to be down to the movement to sort itself out, would be my view.
And Paul?
Yeah, I have to echo what Michael has said, really. I find it a point of great pain, I must say, that furlough has been helpful. So that's a UK government initiative and it has helped us tremendously. There's no doubt about it, and it will really help our staff. We've had no help from the Welsh Government as yet. We do have a rates holiday, but we have no other help. We've tried to apply for a couple of grants and we just don't quite fit in the categories that the government have got. So that's been very awkward for us. And frankly, the sort of levels that support that appeared to be available were just a drop in the ocean compared to the kind of issues that we face. So I suppose I can almost live with that if one thing doesn't happen, and that is if furlough ends and the government have rules that prevent us from operating fully, then that would have us really very upset indeed. So in terms of protecting the leisure industry, we need the furlough payments until such time as we can operate fully. Absolutely vital. And the moment furlough stops and we can't operate and get that income in, there's a very short period of time before the company might be forced into liquidation, which is things that none of us want to hear. But it's the truth. You know, any company can only survive for a short time without income. So I'm very much hoping that the Welsh Government and indeed the UK Government will be sure that they work in sync and make sure that the support for furlough is kept in line with the rules that permit us to operate. And I really fear that we're such a small part of the UK economy that we'll get overlooked as just part of the leisure sector or something. So I'm very worried about that at the moment, I must say.
Okay, thank you all. And now we've got a question from Simon Kedler, who asks, it sounds like much of the heritage sector will effectively have to hibernate and survive through to 2021. Do you think there are any real risks that Heritage Railways might not make it through to 2021? And we'll reverse the order this time, so Paul can go first.
There's a very real risk indeed. If you look at 2021, I think many heritage railways have been planning for scenarios that saw operations coming back in maybe August, a second option in September, and some thinking about October. So, you know, when I look at that narrow time frame, and then I think you've got to say to these people, well, hold on, it may be longer. I think not enough heritage railways have looked at that, and I fear that when they do, they'll realise what a difficult situation they're actually in. Will we all survive? I really don't think so.
And Michael?
No, they won't all survive. I mean, Heritage Railway is different. Some have fairy godfathers who can bail people out. Some are profitable or don't have borrowings and they can batten the hatches down. So I won't discuss those. But no names, no pack drill. There's plenty of Heritage Railways which start the season off with a huge overdraft. And some of those railways run the overdraft throughout the year because they're simply not viable anyway. And they haven't got to grips with that, to be blunt about it. And we've seen a few in the press which are in that category. They will almost certainly go to the wall because they'll never be able to ever run fast enough to jump into the first square. So the moral of this actually is get your financial house in order. Don't have any borrowings on a long-term basis. It's understandable to have them through the winter. And a lot of railways have had borrowings through the winter and they hope to have paid them off in the first 3 or 4 months and won't be able to. Now, they may be able to survive by donations and fairy godfathers and a bit of belt tightening, but there will be a few railways which perpetually run in the red, and they're just going to disappear.
And anything you'd like to add, Jonnie?
I think what they've both said is very much the truth. I do think there will be some that don't survive. From the perspective of the Spa Valley, we're very lucky in that we have no debts and we have no overdraft. We have no overdraft facility actually on our bank account for that very reason, and we've got a very strong charity in terms of its financial structure, and the operating company, which is what I run and look after, is in good health at the moment. But towards the end of the year, that's when I would start getting a bit concerned about it. But at the minute, we have no debts to worry about or an overdraft that needs to be cleared. So in that respect, I'm not too concerned about us, but I am for other railways, probably more so some of the bigger ones than I am the little ones.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so now we've got a question from Tim Dunn. He asks, some of the greatest assets of a heritage railway organisation are its ardent supporters and volunteers. How are the panellists looking to harness their motivation and goodwill now and in the future? So if we start with Paul.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Good evening, Tim. You are right. We are surviving because we've got a lot of supporters. A lot of people like our railway. I know Tim is one of our fans. A lot of people like our railway are supporting us. We've been blessed by donations which are approaching the £300,000 mark at the moment, which has been a wonderful help. I can't begin to explain how wonderful that is and what a breathing space it's given us. It's very useful indeed. So then we start thinking, well, how do we look after all those supporters? And our intention is very simple, and that is to communicate as often as we can, as much as we can, about what's going on, keeping them up to date. And we're using social media and video. I feel like a video star at the minute. I seem to be on YouTube every 5 minutes. Not what I'd expected, but nonetheless, it's really important. We're also blessed with some projects that are going on, so we're still funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, National Lottery Heritage Fund, who are helping us with a project at Boston Lodge, which gives us something to talk about. So our plan really is to try and do something, try and have something to talk about, and to communicate that as widely as we possibly can with the members to keep them close to us.
And Michael?
Yes, I mean, we've got 3 types of supporters, haven't we? We talk about the volunteers and trustees and all our volunteers, and we're looking after those the best we can, communicating with them. We've been holding Zoom conference calls. Actually, we went out to our 700 shareholders have said anybody else would like to help out, and 100 of those said they might. So we've been holding briefing calls with those and setting up teams to help assimilate all that, which is great. It's accelerating our program there. Clearly, our staff are important. The other supporters, volunteers, are also, for us, are very important, which is our local community, because we've got the Commonwealth Games in the city coming up in 2 years' time. The city of Birmingham are very keen on us. We need to embed our Shakespeare Express into the national timetable. So actually, we've managed to recruit some of our stakeholders in the national railway community to help us with that. So by being a bit innovative, we should be able to jump ahead a bit, which perhaps will otherwise have lagged behind.
And Jonnie?
From our perspective, we're routinely emailing and contacting members and our volunteers just to make them aware of our own situation. We rely on them being heavily motivated, and unfortunately this came at a time when they were probably at the best of their game and the best of their ability, with lots of projects really making good progress, and then all of it's just suddenly stopped. But a lot of our volunteers, or most of them, because we're quite a young railway in terms of our volunteer work base, they're all on Facebook. So there's lots of 10 locomotive challenges and things, fantasy engine sheds and things taking place. So there's lots of, I call it banter, that's probably not the right word, taking place between people on Facebook. And we've got an unofficial group as well, where most of our volunteers are in, and they're all sharing old photos from years gone by in which we had great enjoyment, and we're all looking forward to being able to get back to that. And because we are volunteers, it's we have to not only motivate the people we want to come and play with the trains, but people, not just myself, but our chairman and all the other people that do all the very, what would be classed as boring tasks behind the scenes. And there's a group of us that talk between ourselves to keep ourselves going throughout all of this, because I will be quite honest with you, when you're sat here refunding £12,000 worth of bookings, it is actually quite depressing when you pour everything you've got into keeping a little heritage railway alive in Tunbridge Wells.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. This is going to be the final question, and it's from Wilson Hill, who asks, how are you managing the maintenance of locomotives and rolling stock? Are they being kept cold, or are they started up steamed from time to time? Have you considered anything going forward regarding this that might be a bit different from what you're doing now? If we start off with Paul.
Oh yes, I've steamed all our diesels. No, I haven't. Actually, steam engines are easy. You just empty all the water out and make sure they're nice and warm and dry and cosy, and just leave them where they are. The diesels are the bigger problem because the vintage diesels don't like just sitting around. So we've got a scheme where each of our diesels is being started no more than no less than once every 3 weeks. And just warmed through thoroughly, moved around, oils and whatever checked. So that's okay so far, and I seem to have no shortage of volunteers for people who want to do that. Going forward, we are starting to get a little bit concerned about leaving carriages sitting still for a long time. We know that bearings don't like it if they just sit in the same place for months on end. So we might just have a bit of a go of pushing a few things around just to make sure everything's moved. Biggest thing that's concerning me at the minute, turnouts. We live near the sea. It's all a case of all the rails are all going very dry and rusty. I had to move something at Boston Lodge for a contractor this morning, went to move a turnout, it wasn't going to shift. I thought 6 weeks next to the sea, if we don't start oiling these turnouts and doing things like that, we're going to get in a bit of a mess. So we are going to have a campaign to do some basic maintenance alongside the essential safety stuff that we need to do. Okay,
thank you, Michael.
No, we don't have any concerns. Our steam engines are all winterized. Our 08s are fired up, rather like Paul says, about once a month. Our 47's actually at the Severn Valley having some repairs, so that's stuck there. We'll probably shunt up our carriages up and down the place. The workshop equipment's actually all being used, and we will, even if just for the hell of it, steam Cluncastle at some time during the summer and have a socially distanced barbecue, because we jolly well need to.
Sounds great. What about Jonnie?
Our diesels are started up every few weeks, full brake tests, etc., done just to make sure they sit there working. The steam engines they're kept under cover actually, which is very fortunate. They've had their boilers drained down, but because of the way our railway operates, all of the annual examinations were done in February and March. So in effect, everything's just been sat there, and it would only need its sort of routine inspection before it was to run again. Signalling wise, things like the signal box, we've only got one of them, that's been operated to make sure things are still working, and it will need to go for a maintenance inspection before it returns to service. But things like the P-way, they're being patrolled anyway, to make sure it's all in good order for when we do want to return running trains again.
There is one issue we have, I should just mention, steam engines are gauged over the national network for 12 months only. So when the 12 months turns up, they get degauged, ungauged. So that's an issue we'll have to ask for some dispensation with probably, but that's just a local issue. We'll just have to manage it.
Okay, thank you for that. So overall, it's quite, as everyone will appreciate, it's quite a serious situation the heritage sector is in. But I hope that we can, from today, bring some positives that we can get out of this as a heritage sector and go forward and come back to the strengths that have existed over the past few years. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for taking part. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure everyone listening at home will as well. And thank you to Jacob Cooper and Oliver Craig from the Young Railway Professionals, who have helped behind the scenes to run this webinar today. And also we've got another webinar coming up on Thursday from our Northwest region on the introduction of the Transpennine Nova fleets. That should be quite interesting. So if you want to listen to that as well, you can look on the Young Railway Professionals website, and it's all listed there. So thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.